Hey,
You and me again.
what?
It's
Yes, it's
just you and
just,
me again.
yeah. I'd like to discuss a bit, it's not CDL topic as such, but the little almost spat we're having.
Yeah, right.
Uh, I'm, when I'm saying, should I do it elsewhere? I was a bit annoyed because I thought this was the common document, but I'm thinking, no, it's legit. You have your proposal, you have your document, or should we make sections in the document? This is a legit question. What's the right way to
Yeah,
do this?
it's
Because we don't
yeah.
have the same goals, and that's fine.
Well, yeah, slightly overlapping but distinct goals.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is progressive refinement. So it started as a scratch document, it's evolving. There are actual sections in there. So there's discussion number 1, which Rob O'Keefe kind of started, and then there's discussion number 2, and then my proposal is kind of under discussion number 2. You can There's several ways to look at it. So yeah, you could start a discussion number 3 or a proposal. I would still label it number 3 to keep them separate.
Yeah, it's okay. It's discussion number 2 for me, that's chronological. And then discussion number 2 became a proposal, and then a lot of things that are not clearly related to the proposal. And it's a kind of mix of categories. There's
Yeah.
what's distinct about your proposal and what's not. And maybe that's for me to say, this one I could reuse, this one I could reuse and refactor. If you're okay with that.
Yeah. And just say, or you can go in and if the main difference is kind of the description, we could make a description number 2 and say, I'd kind of propose, let's make this a focus, or it could be a separate thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think, being a little bit more explicit about the different, now that we've identified the difference in
Yes.
top level goals,
Yeah.
make that an explicit discussion. Those are all ideas. There might even be a better way to do it. But I think those 2 ways. I think it'd be okay labeling it. If we do A and B instead of 1 and 2, would that make it sound less chronological? They were just meant to be different.
Because there is clearly a chronological aspect that happened, and then you came in in discussion number 2 with, here's my distinct proposal, which is fine. And then really, it's not what I want to do, but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Chronologically, mine came first. I just put Rob's on top.
Right.
So it wasn't intended to be chronological, but it looks it.
Right. Anyway, and I need to do more to say what I'm proposing concretely to do, as opposed to small scale, or at least what I think is an important feature of what I see as distinct.
Yeah, and all these are valid, and I'm trying to figure out a kind of a way to frame these things, because a lot of time that we all have similar top level goals, but we have areas that we're kind of more passionate about, and putting everything in a context, which I guess I actually tried to do. I don't know if you I wasn't very successful at it. In the general channel, I drew some diagrams.
Where? In the Mattermost.
I'm sorry, in general and CDL. Because I'm having this problems in both in CDL or I've identified this kind of friction both in CDL, and so in CDL in the general channel, I'd made some building agreement areas of specialization, and Ben and I got in a long discussion, and he consistently pointed out how my diagram was confusing, which was good.
Okay, no, I didn't.
Still a bit confusing.
I didn't see this. Sorry, I'm not following general as much as I should, because in some groups, general is kind of fun, like cat pictures.
Yeah, and I couldn't figure out where to kind of post this, so I threw it in there, but it may have been better in Hangouts.
So I should read that, because that sounds like important reflection.
But the diagram's still a bit misleading, because it looks like a process flow diagram when really it's meant to be more of a Venn diagram, but it was just kind of active thinking. anyways, but yeah, having some way to kind of like easily grok people's different concerns. I mean, we'd all like to see, large group discussions be more fruitful, society level discussions. So it is an ultimate goal. I kind of want to experiment at a smaller scale, which I know won't scale up. The majority of it won't scale up.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, for me, the smaller scale experiments are done and have failed. Sorry, I'm being blunt, but that's how I feel about it.
Well,
or at least, no, that's not true. They haven't failed. They failed to scale up. They work
Yes.
well at their own scale, and that's fine, and that's valuable, as I said, and it is valuable. But we know they don't scale up, so that's why I'm totally looking elsewhere.
The ones I do think there are some atomic units that are not it's an orthogonal to scale. Like
That
they
is
can be
true.
used, they can provide value at any scale, but they don't solve the scaling problem. So in reason score, I
Right.
want to say, here's a way that two people can look at a claim and come to a numerical understanding of the evidence, the for and against it, and that won't scale in certain ways, but it still can be an artifact that can inform a large group discussion.
That is perfectly fair.
I kind of want to play in that area is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, see, as a curation technique, I'm perfectly fine with it. The whole thing is, how do you coordinate the intelligible curated artifacts, which are necessarily leaving stuff out? If they're not leaving stuff out, they're not intelligible.
Yes. Yeah. A nuance on that, which is that, so like in my idea of reason score that I'm experimenting with, it's a summary, right? So you have a claim and you have a score, right? And then you can go in. So in a way, it is de-emphasizing a lot of it, but in theory, it's all there. But of course, to your point, the larger it gets, the harder it is to find what's there.
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect solution.
No, but I am making a generic statement, and I think it's an important one when we're thinking about collective intelligence. Putting everything on one canvas means nobody will read it, because nobody will want to go. It will be too large for anybody to want to go through it. So the question of how do we allow people to have access to, on the one hand, intelligible wholes that are small enough to be gobbled in a single session, and on the other hand, make sure that what's missing there's a way to say, okay, there's all this stuff missing. It's here if you want to gloss over, but reading this gives you a coherent whole, and it's valuable, but it's not everything. And here's everything else.
So I think that, and different people will have a need for different parts of that information.
That is correct.
So
and that's what I'm saying.
The reason score model does that by having and it's not the only way, but by having a score, right?
And you can filter by anything above a certain score, and yeah, sure.
Yeah. So and using the score to go through, you can read only a 10th or 100th of all the data there and get to the information you want. So it's a way of,
which I do think is valid, by the way, except and here that's a problem I haven't cracked. I believe that the main problem I'm pointing can be done with multiple opinionated curation with crosslinks. The other problem, which I haven't cracked, and I don't know if it's crackable, is if you have any score reason score, whatever, popularity, truth measure, even if we don't believe in them, social truth measure, which is what I'm trying to build, any score. That's then how do you avoid a high grade effect?
Say that again. What type of
How do you avoid, if the vote is continuous, how do you avoid people favoring what's above the fold and, you know, voting for what's popular? And
right. Well,
and I guess that's what Felix is working on right now, doing with his popularity rules, kind of correcting for that.
well, yeah. So I mean, I agree with all that, and that your area of focus saying that we want to be able to have multiple viewpoints and find a way to have people almost, I think of it kind of like diffing, but maybe that's not it. You know, so but you can quickly get to an understanding of the differences of views. I think that's very valuable. I think that what I'm doing in this space does not break that. It's kind of like, in my mind, it's similar to the idea of it's like, you know, I'm going to add on an identity system. It doesn't matter which one it is. And when we get something like hyper knowledge, I think I can integrate this into that without too much work. So I kind of want to focus on this while you're focusing on that.
No, which is fine.
I'm trusting you to solve my problems for me.
I think I'm getting there too. And by the way, I agree with that totally. I just want people to be aware what we're learning at this level in terms of working together is not something that's useful at another scale. But you're right. What we learn about reason score, for example, can totally apply to larger scale systems. But in terms of working together, in terms of the social dynamics of collective sense making,
no.
Right,
it doesn't. Well, yeah, I mean it touches on that a little bit, because some of the problems with social dynamics is like, I mean, so it addresses some very small issues. Like there's the problem with dismissing other people's claims.
Yeah.
Which is one of the core kind of issues. But if you put it in this scoring mechanism, someone puts it in there, you can't just dismiss it. It affects the score. You need to address it. So it tackles that one small piece, but it doesn't tackle the other things at the bigger scale that you're tackling, which is how can you compare these two viewpoints in an efficient way?
Yep.
Or many viewpoints. Rarely would it be just two. It'd be probably 2 viewpoints per person, right? You have 3 people, 5 viewpoints, right?
Oh yes, easily. It's almost a power set. Yep. If I solved it, in a way, I feel closer than I ever have, because I backed up far enough that I feel I have building blocks with the notion of non-persistent concept identity. That was a breakthrough for me recently, like 3 weeks ago. The notion that
I remember you mentioning that. I'm not sure I grokked it, but
yeah, it's okay. Basically, when you have a concept and we use the same concept, we think it's the same concept, so we use the same we somehow converge on the same identifier because we think it's the same concept, and somebody else does, and somebody else does. And at some point, we discover there was this implicit hypothesis that we don't share. So we need to have a version of the concept where the implicit hypothesis is asserted, one where it's denied, and one where it's don't care, the common abstraction. And those are 3 new concept identifiers. If we reuse the original concept identifier as the don't care, we don't know what we're doing. Like what I'm saying is the original concept identifier is, I'm calling it naive with respect to the new distinction, to the new. And any statement that was said, that was made earlier that refers to this original naive one needs to be updated, because was it made with respect to implicit hypothesis asserted, denied, or decided to not care, which is taking position. And there's a kind of update previous statement to say whichever what it was. But the old statement identifier has to be marked as obsolete, because this has become a real issue that people have agreed is a real issue. And there should be a threshold, right? Because otherwise there's a kind of denial of service attack that's too easy, just creates spurious distinctions. But once enough people adopt the distinction as significant, then that creates kind of shared need to position with respect to that distinction. And
So
that means, yeah.
I was just going to say, so you identified the need to be able to tombstone, or not even tombstone because they're not fully there, but yeah, somehow mark things as this is
obsolete. It's an old
obsolete.
definition.
Yeah.
Anything that uses it is
suspect.
Needs to be revised. It doesn't, it can still be there, but I'm not eliminating it, but it needs revision. And
yeah, I think that's a useful designation. Yeah.
And that means there's no assumption that when you use an identifier, you'll be able to keep using it. You'll have to always re-index. That's kind of unavoidable. Like,
yeah.
say,
so like
and most of the time you can automate it. Like for me, I know I had that assumption, so I know I can take all my statements and revise them with thing asserted, denied, or whichever, right? I can make a global choice for my statements. And that's economical, because I probably had an unconscious idea or not. And then I'll, darn, I need to go one by one and check what was I thinking at the time. But that will be rare in theory. The common case is most people, but you cannot do it globally over the whole knowledge base, because people had different implicit unthought assumption.
Yeah, like people were using the term, we use the term sense making a lot over and over.
That's a great example.
And it's like, some people are like, well, in order to sense make, you have to like open yourself up to feelings of what, because they're thinking of sense as an embodied sense. And I'm like, well, yeah, people do use the term that way.
Yeah,
but
it's valid.
I would never.
I love theory U and the felt sense stuff. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And it does provide value.
It does, no question.
Because
it cannot scale.
Really starting to reframe reason score as, I don't know if I told you this, if we discussed this already, but augmented intuition. But now I'm thinking of, it's like refined intuition, like taking your intuition and progressively testing it and refining it and making it more and more concrete and evidence-based, but recognizing that the map will never be the territory, and recognizing that the intuition of the process and the human brain's ability to make these links is an integral part of the process.
What you're doing is, I think I don't know if it's a word. I don't know if it's the name of what I don't know if the word designates that exactly, but it's making things explicit. It's explicitation. It's not explication, it's explicitation. And
yeah, I'm gonna add that to my list of terms.
And what you're doing is providing a score or a measure to guide explicitation. So it's guided explicitation. That's
it doesn't actually measure the explicitation, but it guides it. Yeah, that's a good observation. I like that. Make some notes. It auto-completed explicitation.
It's a word. I'm not sure that's what it means, but it's a word.
Never the process of or fact of becoming explicit or causing to be explicit, which of course is exactly what happens when you put the suffix on explicitation. I just had never thought of anyone using it that way. But yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so one thought about a large scale versus the the scale of this sense doing project is, so there's, when you're doing small scale teams and stuff, it's good to recognize that a majority of this will not scale, and that's the history. And so people shouldn't expect that these experiments that have a large impact on the problems of public sense making. If you're designing a project, can you have a small group explicitly be working on large scale decision making, or does the group have to be of a certain size before you can actually experiment with it?
I think there's a minimal size threshold, but I don't think it's huge. I think what is more important is requisite diversity. There has to be enough diversity of viewpoints represented that real difficulties do arise. And that, okay, we can't, and that may be a question of scale, but like, we don't have a single story. And the point where it gets really difficult is there's enough stories in there that the choices are either too long or too abstract.
Yeah.
Or subdomains. And of course, I'm voting for subdomains, but that's the subdomains with links, of course, so you never feel that you have the overall view. So when does that happen? It depends on the group. At what scale does that happen? I think it's true that below 7, 8, you can usually arrive at, but it's work is exponential. If you're serious, if you're not glossing over stuff, the work is exponential in the number of people.
So one way we could,
or at least the number of viewpoints.
One way that we could expand this proposal beyond what I had initially concept within my head that was trying to get out, to where, before each group of meetings, like, I think an experiment is not a single meeting, most likely could be, but I think for it to be, these to be useful, they have to expand multiple meetings. We could explicitly say, are we trying to tackle a wicked problem? Are we trying to tackle this reasoning at social scale, or is this okay to be a small group experiment or that? And then the scope could be the whole thing. And I just don't know if that scope is too big. Of course, if people prefer working on one over the other, they just attend those meetings. And if there's two groups of people that want to focus on the different areas, they could have, there's no reason that everyone has to attend every meeting. It's a current fully optional thing. So we could rewrite this to just say, as part of the proposal process of what the next group of meetings you'd like to propose, we have them explicitly kind of state that, and in the document have, I think there's a good place in the document for observations that's been made. And one of those observations, your point is well made, that it's a common misconception that these things are these solutions are cross scales, and the
Y- y-
experience has been it does that a lot less often than you think.
It's
I just can't decide if I want to expand the proposal to cover all of that.
what I'm trying to say for this proposal is for the proposal to have value for me, and sorry, that's we don't have the same goals. There should be some thought, and it doesn't have to be a huge full-fledged thing. And I'd say, you know, it can be a wiki, it can be sections of the document, I don't care. But there should be some thought about how do we handle divergence. And this is really where, and how do we handle the moment where divergence, there's enough variety that the full account becomes it becomes too large. How do we handle how to not fragment, because that's not the right term, but to pry apart things. And that's not, it doesn't have to be high tech, is what I'm saying. Like the way Fed Wiki allows forks and cross links between page forks, I think is extremely insightful. A lot of the outline things, including SenseCraft and including the reason score, focus on very terse descriptions, which is great for having an overview, but leaves a lot of unspoken assumptions unspoken, and hides a lot of unspoken assumption if you're not careful. If you're careful, again, you get a big thing. And that's, I don't have a great solution for that. But for example, being explicit about we need definitions, and if there's diverging definitions, we need a way to have diverging definitions and a space to discuss those, and to discuss how to explicitly not resolve what is true divergence, and make that part of the process, because I think this is where there's real insight about what could scale up. That doesn't exclude using measures like reason score as ways to also handle whatever divergence can be expressed in synthetic form, knowing that the synthetic form is missing details and the details are elsewhere, and that's fine. I'm not against, like, sometimes the abstract overview is darn useful. I'm all for it.
This is a problem that I've been working on, and I think my framing of it is slightly different. So like reason score, you want to have a top level claim. I've been thinking, what does this score mean? One of the aspects of the score, one of the things that can bring the score down is the ambiguity of the statement. Now it's nice to have a terse statement because people are willing to read it, but at some point it is ambiguous. And so the question is, when you have words, if you have a little asterisk by it, in case, is that sufficient to have an asterisk that gives you, okay, when we say sense making, this is what we mean? Is that sufficient disambiguation, or does it have to be like a whole document that they click to get the details? Or are both of those fine in different circumstances? Or does it need to be included in the first level of text? Those are kind of the things.
That's a great question. I would personally, I would have just asterisk click and you have the definition, but most important, and by the way, this definition is contested, and here are other definitions used in. But that's
So
me.
another way to phrase that same thing is this section is using this definition. Here is another reason score that is using a similar definition, as opposed to, I mean, so yes, this definition is contested, but don't debate that definition in this space. Go over here.
I'm
know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
It can be.
I mean, like, there's no debating the definition. There is using
absolutely.
the
I
two
absolutely
different
agree. I absolutely
Okay.
agree. The space where the definition is debated should not be the same space as where you're using that definition to debate something else.
Yes, although I would, yeah. My contention is that it's never
never perfect.
worthwhile to debate a definition.
What?
It's never worthwhile to debate a definition.
I disagree. I see your point. I see why you're saying that. On the other hand, the reality is a lot of disagreement end up being definition disagreement, and identifying the definition disagreement. I mean, arguing my definition is right is futile, but arguing about definitions as a way to debug disagreement, I think, is vital.
Well, yeah. So I would say identifying and disambiguating the discussions, the plural, is a clarification to help people not get confused with, we're actually going to sit down and talk about which definition is right.
And the thing is, and this is the difficult reality, is that you're assuming we can have an asterisk and have a thing. That assumes agreement, and that's the whole point. People won't agree on the definition.
No, so, I'm not assuming agreement on the definition.
What I'm saying is, if there's enough participants, and this is where I'm saying size matters, if there's enough participant in the reason discussion, I assume everybody will have a different definition of sense making. I also assume there's going to be kind of a core and kind of non-core aspects to each of those definitions, so that it's still possible to say, we agree enough for the whole conversation to make sense based on our core definition, but the core is fuzzy and blubbery and will move when new people come.
Except I'm proposing a process that
I'm trying to tell you where the process will fail.
Well, but you're not. I don't think you're aware of the process. So I mean, so basically, it starts out, OGM is doing sense making, and then someone says, well, in the discussion, they're like, oh, I'm thinking of sense making as felt bodied sense, and they're thinking of sense making as evidence, rationality. So then it's like, okay, then we diverge the two into two separate debates. One has sense making of parentheses felt sense, and the other one has sense making that. And then you have two different discussions going on, and someone can participate in both.
And what I'm saying,
so there's not. How does that not solve the problem?
Because it's very rare that the distinction is very clear cut, and most people, how should I put it? Most people are not that clear on what they mean. That's a reality. But a lot of people, and I include both in sense making. For me, both qualify as sense making.
Well, they
should both be part of this particular experiment is a different question. But my definition.
So let's be clear.
The
string word sense making points to multiple concepts.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is, people engaging in any one of the definitions, even if you tell them, okay, this conversation's over here, this conversation's over there, there'll be people say, well, kind of both. And do you want to exclude them because they include the other part?
No, there would be a third discussion of we're discussing
what I'm saying is, it's a power set problem. There's so many different aspects of sense making, and I include ABC, you include CDE, somebody else includes ADF, And it's a power set of all these different features of sense making.
Reality is a power set. We're trying to map reality. So just by the fact that it gets overwhelmingly complex doesn't mean that it's still a solution that makes it easier to understand.
And what I'm saying is, it's rare that firewall between definitions. It happens, of course. I'm trying to do that myself. But what I'm saying is, a lot of time, you'll have people who are interested in the rational aspect, but are also interested in including the other one. And you can say, and that's valid. You can say, in this discussion, we're not looking at felt sense. That's valid. But you don't want to exclude people who want to include both and say, okay, let's discuss the rational part for a while. And by the way, what if I had this inspiration from the felt sense and brought it in? It's valid.
You say people aren't good at that. It's like, well, all of these are new practices and no one's going to be good
I'm saying it's not even a goal. I'm saying it's not something that people should be trained at. I don't think
they should be trained at expressing themselves clearly.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they should be trained at being very clear. I agree about what they mean. That's totally with you on that. They shouldn't be expected for this clarity to mean that they'll have these absolutely uncommunicating compartments. The compartments will bleed over, and that's human nature, and it's a good thing about human nature. You have to be clear when the bleeding over happens, because otherwise you have confusion.
There needs to be the
yes,
explicit.
Explicit is good. I agree totally with that. Yeah. but even if you're totally explicit and you say, okay, we're talking about a certain form of reasoning and evidence and rational sense making, and which I'm perfectly fine with. Let's be clear. People, because they have bleeding, and here I include me, because I'm thinking about both kinds of sense making a lot, I'll say, oh, there's this practice from felt sense making, or from moderation practices, or this or that we could try to bring in, and what's the equivalent of that in reasonable discourse, and how can we maybe play between both, because nothing's pure. So
well, okay, so let me try and steelman what you're saying in an example. So like, let's say we're having a discussion, and sense making in this case, we specified to mean rational and evidence-based evaluation. And someone suggests, well, at the beginning of the meeting, maybe we should have a moment of silence where people meditate for a minute, because that will lower our emotional state, and then we'll be better able to do that. I mean,
for example,
I think that can happen, but it doesn't change the definition of the word.
I agree totally.
Sense making, and maybe we shouldn't even use the word. One of the problems is continuing to use the word sense making when it's a very vague word. I mean, I'd almost want to say, okay, let's not use sense making here. Let's use a rational debate system. And then, sometimes fixing the definition is actually changing the word. It's not defining the word.
What I'm saying is, if somebody has a broader thing than rational sense making to bring into the practice, but they agree to be compatible with rational sense making, but they want to broaden it, I don't think it's a good idea to exclude the non-rational things on principle. We can, on principle, say we're only interested in what connects to rational sense making because that's our focus. That makes sense.
I'd say I'm never like excluding. It's like, let's just discuss it in the proper section, right? So to move it over to
but excluding in this section is what I was saying. But yes,
you kind of, and I'm not even saying that we don't discuss the other stuff in that. I'm just saying that we use. Yeah, it's just really being explicit in the conversation, because we can be talking about rationality, but there are the felt sense and intuition comes into that. That's part of the process, right? So we should be able to discuss it. We just shouldn't use the same word to mean two different things.
There, I'm with you totally. Or be very explicit. I'm now using sense making 2 or sense making 3.
Yeah, right. Put a number after it or something.
Yeah, whatever.
Right.
I'm
Yeah. And so I think we're violently agreeing.
Yeah, I think so. But see, I agree that there is such a thing as pure discussion of what we mean by rational sense making. But when trying to define a proposal practice for a group, people will bring in many practices. It won't be pure. And we can say we want making things rational, making things explicit to be at the center. And I'm yay, totally for that. Felt sense should not be an alternative to rationality. If it can complement it, however, I'm very happy with that, because let's face it, so much of our rationality is rationalization.
So what's your opinion on feeling on whether we should take this kind of proposal that I've hashed out and broaden it to where the topics and the experiments could cover wicked and mass sense making, and alternate, not necessarily directly alternate, but we just define the scope between each experiment and use it, or have them be two separate things? Do you care?
Okay, I think what I'm hearing in your proposal, and I think we should both be more explicit about that, is you want there to be a focus on the analysis. Like, what you're interested in is creating these synthetic views and the guide, I think the term guide explicitation is a good one, because that's your focus, and that's fine. And you're saying for you, the experiment has value for you if we have this process of trying to understand what people mean at a very precise level, which is fine. And I'm saying the experiment has value for me if we include social mechanisms for handling divergence of viewpoint that take into account the fact that it won't fit in a single view unless we either section in a single view, unless we abstract too much, it's too long, or we find a way to do sections, and ideally cross-links between sections, because otherwise the sections are not helping. That's my.
So let me take it from a
I think we can do a proposal that includes both those concerns, right?
Well, let me take it from a.
I don't think these concerns are contradictory, but I'm saying those are the two concerns that emerge between us.
But right, but the goal of the proposal in general was to actually experiment with the tools and the processes that are out there. And my desire was to have some of those experiments include reason score.
Understandable.
And some of the other tools in CDL, right?
Which I have no problem with.
I don't think that the tactics that I'm suggesting in reason score and the tactics that you're suggesting should be part of the process to exist in all the experiments. So I kind of think that they should be used in some experiments.
I see your concern. That's a valid point. I was thinking, you have a concern, I have a concern. Can we design a process that accommodates both? And you're saying, why a single process? Fair. That's valid.
Yeah, more like a process that at times our concerns will be part of the experiment.
That's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that. I want people to be aware of the limit of only doing local and include the other one. But yeah, sure, they can be different experiments.
I think maybe there are general lessons that we will want to, part of me wants to say, okay, we're completely process and tool agnostic, and we're just going to experiment different process, different tools. But I think there are some overarching lessons that we should keep in mind when doing this. And
Yeah.
like, even like coming in and saying, hey, kind of, try and be emotionally stable when you come into the meeting might be, so there might be some process that are cross-cutting and go across all these. But I don't reason score, I don't think any of the things in there will be, because there will be some times where people want to do a meditation session or something like that to do a felt sense. And it's like, wow, reason score doesn't apply at all.
Correct.
And I
No, I
think
see what you're saying. And there I'm with you.
yeah, but it might be clear to put that in the list of scopings for when you propose a topic, a tool, and you also kind of talk about, maybe that's a need is scope. Is this meant to be a small group, or are we experimenting with things? So like when hyper knowledge, like let's say there's a hyper knowledge tool and we want to use it in here, we might want to explicitly say, hey, the goal of this is to experiment with large decision makings and large groups. So we'll want to come in with that thought process.
Right.
And then also, to your point, whenever we're doing a small group thing, it may be worthwhile to mention, hey, this would likely not scale. So we don't want people coming in and having this idea that it will be the answer to climate change.
Right.
Because that's too wicked of a problem for this type of thing. So I guess in the end, I was narrowing the scope of the whole proposal prematurely and just need to kind of open it up.
Thank you.
But make it to where when people are making a proposal for an experiment, that we ask for them to be explicit on some of those things.
Yep.
That may be one of the dimensions.
I think that would be valuable. This saying there's many things what do we want to learn from this? And it's entirely possible we won't learn all of it in a single experiment. And what are the possible experimental parameters given what we want to learn? Learner experience.
Mm-hmm.
And my concern is, let's not limit ourselves to things that don't have mechanisms for handling dissent.
Yeah,
because that was, you remember that the handling dissent was one of the origins of the whole situation.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
and I was narrowly focusing it on the really the fact check, because that's my passion. So that's
fair enough. Fair enough. And I'm pushing back because
I
I
think it's definitely worth broadening.
Won't deny it for a second.
Yeah, so I might grab another doc and just kind of reframe it and then figure out how to fit it back in, because I don't think I can edit.
Yeah, I'll try to. I'm working on this particularly, of course. I just came and played the chaos monkey here.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
but it's effective. Yeah, will improve the whole process.
I hope so.
Okay, and then I guess the other kind of CDL stuff is I think I need to propose another schedule, because Tim thought this was a good time and it wasn't, and he's really one of the core players. And I don't know, Felix is probably too busy with his other stuff. He didn't express an interest in general meetings anyways, because he's having his specific ones.
Yeah.
Well, there may not be a big community. I don't know. I'm just on the days I'm available when we have it scheduled, I'll show up, but I'm not making long-term commitment either. So
right. Fair. Yeah, I don't know what's happening with CDL. I'm a bit desperate, to be honest.
I think it comes and goes based on people's life.
What I will start doing, I've had this epiphany lately. I'm trying to write it down more formally, and that's my main activity. I've been working on SenseCraft, working on a lot of conceptual breakthroughs on SenseCraft as well. None of it is in the code yet, but I'm really going forward and on something I think is interesting. So I want to restart hyper knowledge focused seminar. I think it's time for me to restart that because I have new material and I want to make that clearer to others.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what you've gathered these last several months. I like where you go, what I've heard. I like where you're going with that. It sounds very fruitful.
Thank you.
And then I think I'll be able to kind of integrate my thinking into it. Like I see, like mine's kind of a widget that exists within your framework. So it would be one of the things that you could point to. And
Yeah. That's always
multiple
the goal,
ones.
right? Ecosystem. We have to.
Yeah.
The richer the ecosystem, the more joint value.
Yeah. Cool. All right, I got a couple other things going up. So if
Yep.
you have nothing else burning, we can
Yeah,
probably shut it
let's.
down today.
Excellent.
I'll post this in the Sense Doing channel as well, so people can see it. But
excellent.
all right.
Ciao.
Talk to you next time. Bye.
Talk to you.